The state could double the size of a giant project that would send Mississippi River water into the marsh. The Mid-Breton sediment diversion would aim to build new land.
In a special Coast in Crisis report, John Snell tells us about this high-stakes mud fight.
Nearly an hour before sunrise, a crabber pushes away from the dock, a scene that plays out along Louisiana's 7,000 linear miles of coast. Oystermen and shrimpers ply the waters of America's Great Delta. But Nico Tesvich and his fellow fishermen work along some of the fastest disappearing land on the planet.
What's at stake here?
A way of life. A way of life, a culture, families, futures.
He and many other fishermen doubt the state's solution, arguably the most elaborate environmental restoration ever attempted. Key to that effort, the plan to unleash the Mississippi River, now caged in levees, reconnect it to the Delta, and build new land.
The fundamental issue really facing Louisiana is a lack of sediment input.
The Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority has applied for federal permits to build 2 giant diversions on each bank of the river and feed sediment into the marsh, together roughly $2 billion. CPRA announced it will study more than doubling the size of the East Bank diversion to match the one on the West Bank, up to 75,000 cubic feet per second, enough to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool in just over 1 second. One of the great ironies of the 2010 BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico was the windfall it created for South Louisiana, upwards of $9 billion for various coastal projects, including paying for the largest among them.
Throughout history, you have plans and no money, or you have some money and no plans and you waste it, right? We actually have really good plans and we have money. That almost never happens.
These projects are nothing but a money pit.
But many fishermen like Kendra Aronson and Nico Tesvich cringe at the idea.
We need to embrace the saltwater marsh we have and do what we can to keep it around, not kill it with a bunch of fresh water.
They fear not just the fresh water, but nutrients, fertilizers washed downstream from parts of 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces.
Look at what Carnarvon's done on the east side. Go talk to the fishermen over there. Carnarvon's destroyed the east side. Opponents
point to the existing smaller Carnarvon freshwater diversion. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina rolled up the nearby marsh and converted 1/3 of the estuary to open water.
And we should recognize that, and I think should expect that we're going to have more damages. I mean, we don't have a successful example.
LSU's Dr. Eugene Turner is an exception among coastal scientists. The majority side with the state, but Turner points to research showing marsh grass roots get weaker when subjected to pollution from nutrients.
And the larger you do this on the river, the larger the project on the river, the more things you have to have built in to take care of uncertainties. So we've never done this, so there have to be uncertainties.
River levees isolated that marsh for 80 years, and CPRA Executive Director Bren Haas says that may have contributed to the weak soils.
You know, when you have an event like that, extraordinary things are going to happen.
Supporters say just look at satellite maps, which show the Carnarvon diversion building land today, even though it was never designed to do so. It was only supposed to change salinity. Or Wax Lake, south of Morgan City, where the Atchafalaya River spits out a brand new delta.
But I think it's a little less black and white than we've never done this before. We know a lot about what the river does. We know a lot about how it can build land.
Critics want to rely more on dredging to build instant land, suck mud from the water bottoms, and mold the coast to our liking.
You can take a bucket or a million buckets of dirt and put it somewhere, and that's where it is.
The state has spent hundreds of millions of dollars dredging. But scientists argue the same forces chewing at the coast today eventually erase that new land, that any long-term strategy must push back the salt.
So the bigger threat, the science says, is to lose the marsh altogether, because we lose the habitat altogether, and then we don't have fisheries.
Katrina drove home the stakes for everyone, as Louisiana steadily loses its islands, ridges, and swamps, natural defenses.
This is a threat to 2 million people who live and work along the coast.
Governor John Bel Edwards recently vowed the state will work hard to identify risk from diversions, but says the state will follow the science.
But we are going to move forward because there is a sense of urgency.
They're talking about opening something the size of the Mobile River into the heart of the estuary that is the barrier between the Gulf of Mexico and New Orleans. People in New Orleans better wake up.
I'm absolutely convinced of the power of the river and that this will work.
The state says it's only studying doubling the East Bank project, but just the possibility intensifies history's most expensive mud fight. John Snell, Fox 8 Local First.
Imagine planting 1 million tree seeds at one time in an area smaller than many subdivisions. That's what the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation recently attempted.
John Snell reports on traditional and not so traditional efforts to bring back Louisiana's cypress forests and nature's natural hurricane defenses in this Coast in Crisis report.
Volunteers give up a Saturday morning to sow a little hope.
Our kids and our kids' kids will see a big change, and hopefully this land we can save.
Near Montague in Terrebonne Parish, more than 150 people plant young cypress trees on the site of a now dead forest.
That's the first thing you noticed coming out here was a lot of the dead trees.
These 2,000 trees are the last of 30,000 the America's Wetland Foundation and its partners have planted nearby.
These are what we consider transitional projects. These are the projects that are going to help hold the line as the larger projects happen.
The skeletons of old cypress stand in the distance, victims of saltwater intrusion. A new levee will keep out the salt and give this generation a chance.
And over the past 50 years, I've seen the state wash away before my own eyes. You travel down south and you see the vast open waterways that were once land.
Logging also wiped out much of Louisiana's old growth a century ago and some of nature's best defenses. Today, there are still some places where you can step back in time into ancient Louisiana.
Cypress will live hundreds years, even 1,000 years or more.
Nature intends for a tiny fraction of the cypress cones to survive, but when they beat the odds, they can grow into giants. The largest living thing east of the Sierra Nevada mountains resides north of St. Francisville in a swamp preserved as a national refuge. Dr. John Lopez of the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation takes us to a few spots near the Plaquemines-St. Bernard Parish line where they grow a new forest.
But a tree like this is really very effective in terms of storm surge.
Lopez says even a 5 to 15 foot tall tree will start to provide some buffer against hurricanes. What began as a modest effort to plant a few trees is converting a landscape. Over the last 6 years or so, the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation and its partners have planted 30,000 trees out here, mostly bald cypress. They estimate 20,000 of them survive today. All of these plantings involve challenges. Feral hogs can trample young trees. Nutria can wipe out an entire planting.
The first planting we did here years ago, we did not use protectors, and we had a 100% loss of the trees.
Today, most of the plantings involve installing a Nutria protector.
It's just a sheet of plastic that we make a cylinder, and we put that around the tree.
After a few years, the tree bursts out of the protector when it's big enough that Nutria no longer pose a threat. Despite these strides, Lopez says at the current pace of plantings, it would take roughly 1,000 years to replace Louisiana's cypress forests.
In some of these areas, the swamps have been so decimated, there aren't trees there to produce a new crop of trees.
So they're trying it on an industrial scale. Last year, in a test program, they dropped seeds by commercial seeding plane near Pass Manchac. Thousands and thousands of seeds.
When we plant trees, we plant about 200 trees per acre. When we're dropping seed, we're dropping on the order of 5,000 seeds per acre.
Most of the cypress cones won't survive, and it'll take a couple years to know if a significant number of the trees take root. But Lopez says it could drop the cost of plantings by 99%.
It'll take a long time to get the majestic swamp that we once had.
They'll do 3 more plantings this year. And who knows, maybe tiny cypress seeds will grow into giants. John Snell, Fox 8 Local First.
Last year, the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation planted about 800,000 trees. This year, they'll plant roughly 1 million, half of them bald cypress.
Workers are racing against time to try and wrap up a first-of-its-kind island restoration project.
Near Grand Isle, they are piecing back together Queen Bess Island, a vital nesting spot for the brown pelican. John Snell explains the project and where the state got the money in a special Coast and Crisis report.
Pelicans crowd the skies above Louisiana's Queen Bess Island, and each spring, their population explodes. The Louisiana brown pelican rates as one of conservation's great success stories. Virtually wiped out half a century ago, today biologists say the state bird numbers close to 50,000. But Queen Bess is steadily sinking and eroding. During breeding season, a few thousand pelicans cling to 5 acres of real estate, surrounded by a rock barrier installed in the 90s.
Queen Bess was in the bullseye of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Now, fines from the 2010 Gulf spill pay for the island's revival. A $10 million project now underway creates instant land, raising the height of the island. Todd Baker is a wildlife and fisheries biologist.
It's really special. You don't get opportunities to do what we're doing here.
Limestone will cover about a third of the island for other species looking for beachfront property.
He's reaching over, he's getting a big bucket full of sand.
Project manager Katie Freer-Leonards explains they dredge the sand from the Mississippi River near Bellchase, then barge it to the site.
The excavator at this end is moving the sand out of the way, basically creating channels so that the slurried sand material goes in the direction that they want it to go.
This entire effort is about 36 acres. By coastal restoration standards, that's not a big project, but they do have a short window of time. You can't bring heavy equipment into a nursery. So construction had to wait until most of the pelicans had left the island this year. On the day we visited, one lone bird hung out close to its nest near the dredge pipe. Contractors must wrap up their work before the birds start nesting again in the spring.
It doesn't leave a lot of room for error.
We've never really done a project like this in Louisiana.
It's tough to overstate the importance of this island to the brown pelican population.
The vast majority of brown pelicans are found on only a few islands.
Eric Johnson, the director of bird conservation for Audubon, Louisiana, points out 70% of the pelican chicks hatch in 3 colonies, including Queen Bess. A battle of land and sea defines Louisiana's coast. As the Mississippi River shifted course over the centuries, it sculpted a new delta. But land in the old delta lobe steadily broke into pieces, forming islands just far enough removed from predators to create a pelican paradise. Today, man locks the river in a straitjacket of levees.
There aren't new islands being created fast enough to replace the ones that are disappearing.
10 years ago, pelicans in Louisiana nested in 22 colonies. Today, 14 remain. Many of the smaller ones disappeared, including 4 of the Cat Islands in Plaquemines Parish, heavily oiled in the BP spill. That means the pelicans must crowd onto a smaller set of remaining islands.
This creates a lot of potential, the potential for disasters because of hurricanes, oil spills, and those sorts of things. So since 2005, their population has leveled, and that is not what we would have expected given the previous trajectory of exponential growth.
By next year, Queen Bess should support more birds.
If everything goes as we hope it will, the nesting population could increase out here 4 or 5-fold.
One positive sign, so many of the pelicans are hanging around the island, even through all this commotion. Nothing, though, guarantees it will work.
What we do know is if we do nothing, this nesting habitat is gone.
John Snell, Fox 8, Local First.
Pelicans stopped nesting in the 1950s following the widespread use of the pesticide DDT, which was later banned. Biologists reintroduced the birds to Louisiana in 1968. Forest.